Hi, I'm Chrissy.
And I'm Jess, and this is Financial Progress. So today we have a special guest, Carla Santamaria. She's a career coach and host of the First Gen Coach podcast.
Woohoo! Welcome, Carla.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we begin, I just want to give a little disclaimer that this is just a conversation between friends. This is not financial advice, and please seek the help of a financial professional before making any financial decisions.
Great. So before we get into the job hopping to six figures and protecting your peace, we want to get to know you a little bit more. Can you tell us about your financial progress over the years?
Sure thing. So, where do you want me to start?
Wherever you want. You could tell us everything if you want.
Okay. Well, so I mean, well, actually, let me start by saying, so I was born in Honduras, and once again, thank you so much for having me. I think it's really important that the folks hear their stories and see ourselves represented in the media. So, just thank you so much for that. And I guess a little bit about my background and my trajectory towards financial progress. I was born in Honduras to teen parents. I think my parents were like 20 when I was born, but I already had an older sister.
Mhm.
So I actually haven't stopped too much to think about how that impacted, but it
Mhm.
definitely played a very big part. So I was born in Honduras, lived there up until I was 8 years old, just shy of my ninth birthday. Our family moved to the United States, and so really my formative years, my teen and adolescence and into early adulthood were shaped by being first gen, immigrant, low income, and it kind of limited what I thought was available to me. Like I grew up having a very, very limited idea of what making good money was. And then there were things that were available to me and things that were just for rich people. And like most immigrants, I was raised to believe that education is the key to a better life. And because I had grown up just being on the receiving end of community based organization outreach, that was what I was introduced to in college. And my entry into the professional world was in the nonprofit. And so, again, even though I'd graduated college, my first job was an AmeriCorps member. And I remember my dad asking me, Carla, pero ¿para qué te graduaste? Si vas a ser voluntaria, like what did you graduate to become a volunteer? Because I was just making a stipend of $1,000 a month. Like it was wild living in Miami. And so that was my first entry into the professional world. That's where really I started. Then I I guess I finished that AmeriCorps year, did another AmeriCorps year. After that, I started making $20 an hour. And I was like, oh my God, this is so much money. And like it was so much more money. I was making less than minimum wage as an
Mhm.
AmeriCorps member, so it felt like so much money at the time. But really, $20 an hour is $40,000 a year. And had I had to be paying rent, that would not have been enough. I mean, I was living at home with my parents, so I think a lot of my early adulthood again was shaped by that. Eventually, I went into graduate school and I got my graduate degree in community and social change. And again, teaching the idea of this is how you manage nonprofits. This is how grassroots organizations work. This is why capitalism is bad and how corporations are ruining the planet and how not to be a sellout. And so, of course, I finished my master's degree, continued working in higher education, higher ed, was making the most money I'd ever made, but it was still only $51,000 a year. And at this point, I had student loans. I had so many bills. I was paying rent actually because I had moved out. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have any money. So I was kind of struggling with that and really also struggling with some other things that were going on in the workplace. And then, of course, 2020 rolls around and I'm transitioning all of the campus operations for my institute that I was leading into fully remote. It was so much work. I was just like spending a lot of time. I think in 2020 most of us did a lot of reckoning, and it was around this time that I started getting into personal development and really working on my mindset about a lot of things, and
Mhm.
my money mindset was one of them. And so I started kind of thinking about, wait, like I can't, this is not a family sustaining wage. My partner and I had been wanting to buy a house, and I was trying to do the math with my salary, and it just wasn't mathing. It was just not going all the places I needed my paycheck to go. It just
Mhm.
wasn't enough. And it had created a lot of anxiety for me. And I had, again, like a first gen immigrant, I was raised on the belief that education is so important. So I loved my higher ed job. Eventually, I realized that it was not the place for me. I ended up leaving, and I went from making 51K a year to making 65K a year in a healthcare setting. I hated that job. Yeah, so I think that's how I really had my job hopping moment, because I just did not like, I even though I was making more money, I still found myself underpaid. So then I realized, I'm like, okay, you know what? I need to get into tech. And I did. And so then I went from making 65K a year to making six figures in the tech sector. And so over the span of a
Wow.
year, like before I started graduate school, most money I had ever made in a year was $20,000. And 5 years later, between my tech job and in my in my business, it's kind of wild that I am able to say this, but I am on track to making $200,000.
Wow.
Wow,
That's amazing.
congratulations. That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you so much.
That's a huge come up.
I know, from 65 to 6 digits. We wanna know the secrets.
Happy to share. Happy to share.
Yes.
So, okay, so oh my god, where to start, right? So what specifically, when you transitioned to that 65 to 6 digits and tech, what did you have to have a tech background? Did you find something that was, like, sort of techy but considered tech? Like
Okay, so no. Not at all. I mean, it is terrible. I used to say, like, if I can work in tech, literally anyone can, because I had to stop telling myself this story. But I used to say, like, oh my god, I'm so bad at tech,
Mhm.
and I've had to like figure out the tech with like my podcast and my business, and I'm like, no, I am good at tech.
Yes.
Just like changing that talk. But honestly, no. When I decided to transition into the tech world, I actually didn't really know what that meant. I
Mhm.
remember somebody asked me, "Oh, Carla, so what kind of tech company are you looking for?" And I remember kind of just being caught like a deer in headlights and thinking, Facebook, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. Like all I could do was name the FANG stocks. Like that was the only tech companies that I knew. It was just the FANG stocks. And and then the girl that I was talking to on the phone, the person that I was talking to on the phone, she was so kind. She was like, "Oh, Carla, there are so many more." Like you need to understand what the tech landscape looks like so that you can choose. Do you want to be at a startup? Do you want to be at a public company? Do you want to be in big tech? Do you want to be in pre-IPO? And I was like, I don't know what those words mean. Like I just what? And so that's when I really started to like understand the industry more. But I guess to answer your question, this is something that I say to all of my clients and I say on my podcast all the time. Like every job that exists in the nonprofit sector and in the higher education sector has an equivalent in the tech world. And so in higher education, I work with, student services and community engagement, not so much student services, but community engagement, nonpartisan border education. So that was equity based work. I leveraged that experience into a diversity, equity, and inclusion role in healthcare. And like I said, it wasn't for me, but I leveraged that title because I knew that I'd been doing equity based work for 10 years. I just didn't have the DEI job title. So I leveraged that DEI title and then my experience in the past and to get into a DEI program manager role, which is what I was looking for. So I looked for the equivalent role and the way that I could highlight my transferable skills without necessarily becoming techie or having to
Yeah.
get a new degree or become an engineer. Like, no, just leverage my transferable skills and leverage my knowledge and look for that equivalent role.
That's great because there's a lot of people who I hear who have spoken. It's just like, oh, you need to get into a boot camp or you need to do this before getting in. So that's good. We need to talk. We need to talk. So funny thing is, so my undergrad is in information systems. I've been in the nonprofit sector and I need to get out of it so I can make the six digits.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. Let's talk more.
Yeah. Yes, this is great. I love this.
Yes. So, Carla, can you tell us how you have helped people job hop to six figures?
Yes. And so let's talk a little bit about job hopping for a second. So to
Mhm.
me, job hopping is getting a new job every 18 to 24 months, or at least that's the way that I describe it. And the reason that I talk about job hopping is that this is how you can radically increase your income. So when I think of, oh, I job hop to six figures, like the way that I did it is I job hop from higher ed to healthcare to tech in 10 months. I literally would have stayed at that healthcare job if they'd given me a 5K raise, and I would have stayed at my higher ed job if they'd given me a 5K raise. And both of those fools let me go, and I was like, "All right, that is your loss." And
Mhm.
so, really, I wanted, from higher ed to healthcare, I wanted to just get. It was literally like 5K that I was looking for, and it was just like some bureaucratic nonsense. I was getting not equal pay for the work that I was doing. It was just awful, so I ended up leaving. But I would have stayed if they'd given me that 5K, and actually increased my salary by almost $15,000. So I went from making 51K to 65K.
Mhm.
And again, if they'd given me that 5K raise, I wouldn't have increased my salary by 15K.
Mhm.
Similarly, when I was making 65K and I was trying to like tell my boss that, like, lady, I really like, that in the beginning you were going to pay me 70, but I didn't negotiate. I should have negotiated, whatever. I was looking for 5K more. And she was like, ha 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 ha, ha, that's not going to happen. She was awful. It's like a whole other story. So then I left and increased my salary by over $50,000. And
That's
so
amazing.
that is, like, actually, I think I maybe the first time I say that out loud. Wow.
I'm so proud. I'm so
Wow.
Yeah. So if they had just given me those $5,000, I would have missed out on 10 times as much. And so this
Mhm.
is what job hopping, at least one of the benefits of job hopping, there's so many more, but it is the fastest way to increase your salary is going from one job to the next. Now, the other thing is about job hopping is that it's so much more than just a salary. It's really your approach to work. Like you go in, you do your job, and you get out. Like, I mean, I know that that sounds kind of like common sense, but it's really not. How many of us are working late hours? How many of us are checking our work email over the weekend? How many of us are stressed out during our time off? If we even take that time off because we think we have to like solve some crisis or some emergency at work. Look, I don't know what, I mean, Jess, you mentioned you're a nonprofit and, in information systems. Chrissy, I don't know what your role is, but very few people have jobs that are actually life or death. This is actually one of the many reasons I love healthcare. I'm like, I can't, y'all. Like, I like to be able to say this is not life or death. I cannot be the person that is. Nope, it wasn't for me. Shout out to everyone who really is. Shout out to first responders. Shout out to people that do actually have life or
Mhm.
death jobs. I work in HR. Human resources is not life or death. And so, again, this approach to work, this approach to job hopping is understanding that your job is not life or death, even if it is extremely important. Even, I started my career in higher education and college access, even when I was working with these kids who, just like me, had grown up in kind of rough neighborhoods and communities with very limited resources. Even that is not life or death. And those students or whoever you are working with would benefit from you taking better care of yourself. And so with my clients, I really help them understand that they are the number one priority, even when they have children. It's like actually taking 5 minutes to yourself before you go talk to your child, that actually will make you a better mom. And having hobbies outside of work will make you a better employee. Taking this time off, taking a mental health day and just going to the dog park with your dog, that is going to help you come back to work and be more productive. And not that we should measure our worth by our productivity, but all of these things are part of prioritizing yourself and changing your approach to work and knowing that you're more important at your job, and that actually makes you better at your job. And
Mhm.
so this is how I work with my clients. I help them understand this. All of these examples that I used about waiting 5 minutes, or taking a mental health day, or taking your dog to the dog park, or having an after work routine, all of them are actual things that I've worked with my clients one on one, so that they can prioritize themselves and their mental well-being, so that they can
Mhm.
show up better for the things that they care about and the people that they love.
Yeah, that's
That's
super
deep.
important. Yeah, definitely prioritizing yourself is very critical and important. Um, how would you leave a job well?
Ooh, I like that question. So I have for of my jobs except one, have left it well. I mean actually all of them, even the one that I was going to say was the exception, I did leave it well. So to me leaving a job well is completing all of your like pending tasks and leaving a good impression. So those are the two things, the two components for leaving a job well. And leaving a good impression is important because whether you like it or not, you might have to reach out to those people that you worked with for a million reasons, either for employment verification or for, because you might actually end up working with them in a future workplace. Just like there's like a million reasons why you want to leave a good impression. And so I think that's the biggest part in terms of leaving a job well. The first part is just completing all your projects. I mean, like wrap them up. If you once you give your notice, most people are not going to be giving you like pivotal new projects to complete in the 10
Mhm.
days that you're there. So just complete everything that you have. If you're in a leadership position, just leave a transition plan. It can be as easy as a document that has, hey, this is what I'm working on and this is what's pending. And I would say that is how you leave a job well. Just leave even if it's a one pager as a transition plan, and then leave a good impression. You can leave a good impression many ways, just taking the high road when you give your notice. Even that boss that laughed at me, I didn't quit and say like you're a dumb hoe. So like I did not say that as much as I wanted to. I just said, I found an opportunity that's better aligned with my career expertise and goals. And that pays me twice as much as I'm making here. But I mean, I just that was like the slight little bit of pettiness that I allowed into that conversation, but I kept it very tactful. Like I could have gone around telling all my coworkers, I'm leaving because my boss hates me, or like I'm leaving because she laughed at me when I asked for a raise. No, I just said I found an opportunity that's better aligned with my skills and with my goals. And so I think those are the two elements of leaving a job well, is just making that transition plan and just like making sure that you leave a good impression when you quit. And when you give your notice, make sure that you give your notice if you have, the full 2 weeks. I would also say if you're able, like anybody that you might have a relationship with, that you want to continue that relationship, either connect with them on LinkedIn, or if you haven't connected yet, you probably already have, but, just spend some time to like let them know, because there's a lot of debate about whether or not you can be friends with your coworkers. There are people that are actual friends that you just happen to meet at work. You don't want them to be blindsided by that mass email, hey, Fulanita is leaving your job. No. So set up some time to talk to the people that you care about. Let them know that you're leaving. If you can, if you want to, on your last day or on your last week, you can send an email to everyone in your team and say, hey, everyone, Friday will be my last day. If you'd like to keep in touch, this is my email address. That's it. Just kind of this nice touch of letting people know, like, hey, I am a human who worked here, interacted with you as a human, and I'll see you all later. So it's just those nice touches that leave a really good impression.
Great information.
So, do you think that employers, when they see you job hopping, you think that it looks bad? Does it affect your hire?
Yeah, that is a great question. And the way that I define job hopping is 18 to 24 months. I did leave my
Mhm.
healthcare job in 10 months though, because I hated it. I was like, I need to get out of here.
Mhm.
But I I was able to manage that question, because here's the thing. I thought that I had to stay at a job for a year, otherwise it would look bad. Like that's just what I was thought. Like so, even though my boss was very disrespectful to me, I I was like, I just have to put up with it for 6 more months before I quit. And then I'm like, what? What? I thought that that I had to put up with it for 6 months because of this, because this idea that it's gonna look bad when I quit. But here's the thing: when I was interviewing, and inevitably, almost everyone asked me the question, like, oh, I see that you've been at your job for less than a year. Why are you trying to leave? This is what I would say. I would say, job was not, it did not turn out to be how it was conveyed to me in the job interview, which was true. I thought I was going to be doing a lot of learning and development, and I was not. I was sitting in a cubicle, like sneezing because of all the mold and dust. It was not how it was conveyed. So I did say that. I also said I'm looking for something that's more aligned with my expertise because this role seems is a bit more junior than I anticipated, which was also true. I went from being director level in higher education to being coordinator level in healthcare, and I was okay with taking that step back in job title because it meant an increase in salary and because I wanted that DEI title in my resume. But it did end up being so boring. I was like, oh my God, I literally could have done this like 5 years ago, or like I could have led this presentation so long ago. Like it actually was more junior. Those were some of the lines that I was telling people, depending specifically on the job, and they were true. So even though people did ask, I did tell
Mhm.
them how it made sense. And now here's the thing. 18 to 24 months, that's kind of a long time. If you are in like 6 months into a new job, for example, then you can say some of these things like, hey, I'm leaving because it's not the right fit for whatever reason. It's not aligned with my goals, the culture. Or another thing that people say, I tell actually this to my clients when I find themselves in a workplace that is toxic. You could say like, oh, there's some leadership changes and it's changing the direction of the company, or something that actually is true to you, but that is not necessarily airing your dirty laundry, because you don't want to
Right.
do that. You don't want to say like, my boss is a dumbo, or like my boss is a bumbling buffoon, or like, oh my God, like they're doing layoffs and I'm scared I'm leaving, or I actually really hate it. Like you really are. Remember, a job interview is a time for you to showcase your skills and why you're an asset to the company, not for you to be airing your dirty laundry. So even if you're interviewing, between 6 months and I want to say 18 months, there's a couple of things that you can say. I've said some examples. If you're interviewing in less than 6 months, you can lean on, hey, this wasn't the right fit. And now here's the thing, if you're constantly finding yourself doing this, then that might be an issue. But no one is going to begrudge you once or twice having to like leave a job after 3 or 4 months. And if they do, then that may not necessarily be a role where you want to be. You can also just leave it out of your resume. Like I
Mhm.
work with a client who worked at this one place for 2 months. She hated it so much that she just doesn't talk about it. Like she's like, you know how we don't talk about Bruno? It's like we do not talk about that job.
Yes.
Doesn't have it on her resume, doesn't have it on her LinkedIn. She's like, explain this job gap. It's like, no, it's
Mm-mm.
this was an opportunity that was not the right fit. So that's, you can just keep it moving. Don't dwell on it too long. Don't start listing out the reasons why that job is toxic or whatnot. So again, to I guess summarize and succinctly answer your
Mhm.
question, is it going to look bad? It really depends on how you frame it. If you show up and say, well, it's not my fault I always have a crappy boss, or like, it's not my fault they pulled the bait and switch, like that's the bigger red flag. Because what employers want to know when they're asking this is, hey, if we hire you, are you going to quit in 6 months? Because that's going to cost them money. So it's your job to just reassure them, like I'm interested in this role for these reasons, and even though my previous position didn't work out, this position here is like aligned with my long-term career goals. So again, it's not about the specific amount of time that you stay. It's really about letting them know that you are a good investment, that they're making a good investment in hiring you. And there's also a lot of reasons. Like there's, for example, like military spouses that sometimes have to move jobs all the time. Or, like there's a lot of valid reasons. Like maybe you're a caregiver, like maybe you had to take care of your child or your parents or a family member. Maybe you had another medical reason why you needed to leave. Like there's so many valid reasons, and just you definitely want to frame it in a way that just lets the employers know that you're not going to like run away. Like even if you need to take time off for your mental health, you can actually just let them know. Actually, if I have to take away time for my mental health, I would say, I was dealing with a health issue and I had to step out of the workplace to fully recover. Now that I'm fully recovered, I'm excited to get back into my career. So lots of ways. You just remember the most important part is letting them know that you are invested in the role that you're applying for.
A lot of good tips. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Um,
Let's say there's an individual who loves their job, they're not getting paid enough, but they're scared to move into another position for money.
So what's the question?
What advice would you give?
Okay. So first I want to say I've been there. I mentioned that I loved my higher ed job. I truly, like, I was working at the place where I got my associate's degree. It was the place where I got a scholarship, where as a student, I had had such a positive, beautiful experience. And it was a community college. And so I was working with students, again, who were like me, students who were low income, students who were working, students who were like the breadwinners of their family and were going to classes at night, students who had experienced being homeless, students who were just like students who had gone through the struggles. And I loved that I was there and that I was a resource and that I was able to like create more equitable outcomes for them. I absolutely loved that job. And I knew that I was underpaid.
Mhm,
And when I finally decided to put myself first, it was a grieving moment. Like I remember I was crying, like crying for like an, for a very long time, because as much as I loved that job, I had to love myself more.
mhm,
I had to remind myself this, the moment that this happened, this was about 6 months after my grandmother had passed away. And I remember thinking, like, my parents didn't move me from Honduras for me to be at this job where I'm overworked and underpaid. And I'm like, I didn't give up living next door to my grandma in my childhood so that I could be overworked and underpaid. I didn't bust my behind for years and years studying, going to grad school, going
mhm,
through all these jobs to get to where I am for me to be overworked and underpaid. That was the moment actually that I decided to leave, when I had this realization of like, I need to love myself more than this job. And that was like this, like, peace came over me. And it was like, oh, okay, it's okay to leave. And that was finally when I really started actively looking for a job. Um, and then when I, transferred, job hop from higher ed to healthcare to tech, it was this moment of loving myself more. So I would say, like, if somebody is overworked and underpaid, but they're scared, it's like, love yourself more than your fears. That is just so, so crucial. Now, in terms of like the tactical things, because I'm not going to tell anyone, oh, like, love is the answer and then quit. Actually, you know what? I did work with one client who was in a job that was so racist that she actually did quit her job without another job lined up. And for the longest time, I felt like I let her down. And this was like one of my first clients. And she worked a couple of places. And then, like less than a year later, she ended up moving, got her dream job. I remember when we did an exercise where she talked about her dream job. She was like, I work in a beautiful high rise and I have a great view of downtown. She ended up moving to Boston. You know what? She works in a beautiful high rise where she has a great view of downtown. She went from making $17 an hour to $85,000 a year. And I was like, oh my God. And yeah, it was
mhm,
incredible. And, it took her a little bit, like the first step was actually quitting that racist job. And even though she didn't have necessarily like her next step immediately figured out, I
mhm,
remember talking to her because, we stayed friends. And I was like, oh my God, like I always thought I failed you as a coach. And she was like, are you kidding me? You gave me the courage that I needed to leave that job. And it was only once I left that job that I could actually pursue what I wanted. So again, maybe sometimes loving yourself is the answer. And so, there is one example, but if you're not in a place where you have that safety net or that sort of freedom to explore, and you do want to have your next job lined up, I will say
mhm,
just focus on two things. Like, so for example, for my client, it took her about 10 months to land in that role where she was very happy. And similar for me, like I just had that like rest stop in that job that I wasn't loving before I landed. So just know that you don't have to have all of your steps figured out. You can just have your next steps figured out. So as much as I've kind of been trashing that healthcare job, sorry, was not expecting that. I actually was extremely grateful for it. And that's one of the things that like really helped me on the tough days. I was like, I'm actually truly, truly grateful for this job. This job was exactly what I needed. Because what I knew that my next step, remember, I wanted to have DEI on my job title because I knew that that was going to be a stepping stone for my next job. So I was like, I need to have DEI in my job title. I need to not be driving an hour and a half to downtown Miami. So I was like, this job needs to be close to my house. It was a 19-minute drive from my house.
Nice.
I
mhm,
love that. So from commuting an hour and a half each way to commuting less than 20 minutes each way, it was beautiful. And then, of course, I needed to make more money. And so each of those three things, the most important things, where what that job was for me. And again, when it got really hard, I had to come back and remember, like, this is what I wanted. This is like, I manifested this job. This is truly like the next step for me. I'm now ready for my next steps. So it's okay to do the scary thing. Just get really crystal clear on what it is that you need for your next job. You don't need to figure out the next 10 years. Just figure out what you need in your next job. What are the parts of your job that you do love? And what are the parts of your job that you don't love? And what is it that you're scared of? Is it scared? Are you scared that you're not going to have like good health insurance? That's something people tell me. Is it scared
Mhm.
that you're not going to get along with your boss? Like, actually, people tell me, like, oh, I kind of like my boss. I don't want to leave. Is it like, what is it that you're scared of? And really understand what a best case scenario would look like. And then just go for that best case scenario. Like, it's like, if you want that remote job, or if you want that job in a high rise, or if you want a hybrid role, and whatever it may be, do you want to work with students? Do you want to work with the elderly? Do you want to work with community organizations? Do you want to work internally? Just find it what it is that you're scared of, and it's like, well, what's the flip side of that? What would be the best case scenario for that? And just write it out. And like, do like an ideal workday exercise, like I did with my client. And that is actually going to open up your mind to see that there are so many opportunities out there for you.
Wow.
This is a lot
That
of great
was
information.
great. Yes, definitely.
I'm ready to job hop to 6 digits. I mean, oh man. So for me, I'm just ready. So should I just like fix my resume and like tailor it to the next job I want? I'm ready to just like right now, like this moment.
Okay. Thank you for asking that. So everybody always thinks that fixing their resume is the first step. And yeah. And like, to me, I actually got my first tech job without submitting my resume. To be, like, I reached
Oh.
out to someone on LinkedIn. And so actually, let me tell you really quick. I had spent, because I had job hopped like twice in 1 year. I was like, the second time, I'm like, I need to do this differently. Like, I'm not doing it like the way that I did it before, because it just obviously didn't work, because now I'm in this job that I don't like. So like, I need to be very, very intentional. And I ended up deciding that I was going to talk to people, and just talk to people and learn as much, and like try to get closer and learn about their tech jobs and learn about what they're doing. And so talk to as many people as possible. And I was adding them all on LinkedIn, and that expanded my network. And now I don't work for LinkedIn, but I do make LinkedIn work for me. And so when I was adding all those folks on LinkedIn, you know what it does? You know how the algorithm, like how your Facebook wall used to be like, Fulanita posted so and so. And then it's like, Fulanita liked what, like Periquita Perez wrote that somebody else wrote, something like that.
Yeah.
That's actually how I saw. It wasn't even like a job posted on LinkedIn. It was like a PDF that somebody said, hey, this is our job description. And I reached out to her. I didn't have any mutual connections with her. I didn't even have any like second connections with her. She was like third plus, like a connection of a connection of a connection. I don't even know how it ended up in my feed. Actually, I do know, because I expanded it, and like somebody had reshared it and somebody else had liked it, and I was connected to the person that liked it. And so I reached out to her, and I was like, hey, I see that you posted this role for a DEI program manager, based on my experience and the requirements. I think it would be a great fit. Would you be open to a conversation about this role? She said no. So to her credit, because it's a
Oh.
DEI role, and I laugh, because for a diversity, equity, and inclusion role, it's actually better that they weren't taking these coffee chats. But what she said was, I am going to add your name to the list for the manager. And so she didn't like, she didn't give me any like insider information or anything like that. All she did was send my resume to the manager who was going to be hiring. Now, I then had some like personal stuff going on, and I completely forgot to send her my resume, but she shared my LinkedIn. And based on my LinkedIn, I got an invite for a job interview. And of course, I was, like based on my job interview, and, like I was the most qualified person for the role. So I didn't actually submit my resume. I
Wow.
didn't submit my resume. Yes,
Yeah.
but I did work.
Yeah.
I actively like reached out to her. I said
Mhm.
I'm interested in this position, and my LinkedIn obviously had been updated, from before. So it was like my resume, but like actually my resume itself, the physical one-page document PDF, I did not submit that. So I just want to kind of say
Mhm.
out loud that I did not submit my resume for my first tech job. So you don't have to necessarily start at your resume. Here's the thing though. What is so crucial about resumes is that a resume is a reflection of what you think about your career, because people, that's where they start, and I think that that's where they get it all wrong, because you don't start with your resume, you start with your mindset. You
Hmm.
start with understanding that, first of all, yeah, you do deserve that money, go for it, girl. And second, it's like you do have the skills, you have contributed significantly to every workplace, and those skills, that impact that you've made, have a monetary value, and there are companies out there looking for that. And so it's not the resume where you start, it's your mindset. And it's like, yeah, so it's your money mindset, and like your idea of like what you think about yourself. Because your resume, it's just a document, but in reality, it is a reflection of what you think about your career. When people say, "Oh, my resume is so bad," what they mean is, I don't have confidence in my skills. I don't believe that I have contributed enough in the workplace to get a new job. So again, that resume is just a reflection. So the first step, you're ready to go. The first step is to work on your mindset. And it's like, all right, just brain dump, just journal, or if you hate journaling, because I know some people hate journaling, it's like think of like the nanny diaries. Just take out your iPhone and start, vlogging to yourself, just like getting the thoughts out of your brain, either on
Hmm.
paper or in, like in a voice memo, just like get them out of your head. And now, once you're like, okay, this is why I want a new job, this is why I know I deserve it, you can start listing all of the impact that you made. And I actually, as we're recording this, it's November, and I'm like, oh crap, I have not updated my resume this year. I'll do an episode, a podcast episode, like actually updating my resume, because I'm like, I haven't done it yet. So what I'm gonna do before updating my resume is I'm gonna list out everything that I've done. And I'm like, wait, like in my job, like 10 different people have reached out to me and said, hey, Carla, can you come do a presentation on X, Y, or Z? Like some of them have been the same and some of them have been different. And it's just like, yeah. And how many people went to that presentation and what was the value of it? And of course, like I am a facilitator at heart, I'm an educator at heart. That's where I started my career. So, like, of course, I'm going to be doing that in any job. But what job are you in? It's like, well, you set information systems in a nonprofit. So, like, how many people are you serving? How many employees? How many community stakeholders? What is the point? So I'm going to give you the example of a client who worked, part of her job included recruiting. And I'm like, all right, but what's the point of recruiting? And it's like, well, if we don't get enough students signed up, then our enrollment numbers goes down and then our funding goes down. And I'm like, okay, so that is the impact that you're having. And like, tell me more about this recruiting. It's like, well, in the past they used to have like a sign up sheet like it's 1992, so I made it digital. And it's like, all right, so you digitize this process, you were able to reach more students. Like, what is the impact that you're having? If you're going to a community event and you're tabling, what is the point of that? You're increasing awareness, so increasing brand awareness, you're again recruiting new people, creating access to services. Like, what is the impact that the work that you're doing is having? And then you can include that in your resume. But first, you got to work on your mindset. First, you got to tell yourself that you are enough as you are and that you are ready for that next job.
Amazing. Focus on impact. It's super important. That's a lot of good tips. Thank you so much for that.
It's a lot of information. I gotta go back
Yeah.
and rewatch.
Yeah. Got some notes down.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes, yes.
um,
Are you still in tech?
Yes, yeah. So I definitely, like I have my tech job, which I appreciate and I'm so grateful for. And I have my coaching business. I work with clients one-on-one. I also do speaking engagements. So I do workshops for ERGs and for nonprofits. So yes, I'm still in tech and I have a coaching business.
Nice, nice,
okay.
nice.
So still in tech as an HR role, you said?
Yes.
Or
So
okay.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
HR and tech.
Awesome.
Listen, if you work in HR, again, I said this in the beginning, but I'm going to say it again. Every job that exists in higher education, nonprofit, and even government has an equivalent for tech. If
Mm-hmm.
either if it can be the same role, like for example, in human resources or in information systems or in learning and development or in events, in marketing, in community management, in raising funds, I mean, they call that sales in, the corporate sector, but it either has that same equivalent role or a counterpart role. So, somebody recently told me, like, how can I transition into the private sector when I work in student services? And it's like, well, think about every single company that you interact with. Who do you hire for your trips? Who do you work with for catering? Who do you work with for the technology that you use? Who is your email provider? All of those people have a liaison, like a higher education. All of those companies have a person whose job it is to liaise with either education or government or K through 12, and that's a job. And that is how you can find the counterpart role. So every job, I'm still in tech, and like every job that exists in the nonprofit sector and other sectors has an equivalent in the corporate sector.
Awesome.
Mhm.
That's
That's good to
amazing.
know.
So, what is one piece of financial wisdom you would like to leave with our audience?
You're not a bad person for making more money.
Yeah,
I
I
had to
like
learn
that.
that. Yeah. It is. Yeah. Listen, that's it. Like, if you're a good person making 50K a year, you're going to be a great, even more of that good person making 150K a year. Like one thing that was really critical in my financial progress is overcoming the shame that I felt. And it's so weird that I felt shame about this, but I did. Like, I felt bad that I was making more money than my parents. Like, I felt guilty. I was like, my parents work so hard. Like, my dad works in a physical job, and my mom has worked a lot of different jobs, and she took a new direction, and she became a real estate agent, and then she became a health insurance agent. And it was like, she's finally making that stable income. But like, both of them have worked so hard their entire lives after bringing us to the US. And then here I am sitting in an office making 65K a year. I felt so guilty making more money than my parents. And then I realized, wait a minute. Isn't this the whole point of this exercise? So, like, the whole point of them bringing me to the United States was to live a better life that can be afforded to me with a higher salary. Like, isn't that the whole point of this exercise? So once I was able to, like, intellectualize that and let go of that guilt of making more money than my parents, then I was
Mhm.
like finally able to, like, get my first 6-figure job.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. How can our audience find you?
Sure thing. So folks can find me first and foremost on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. So my podcast is called the First Gen Coach Podcast. And if you're listening, please leave it a review or a rating. Say hi. You can also find me on Instagram at Carla, the First Gen Coach. And on my Instagram is usually where I talk about all my free trainings and, like where I share all of these wisdoms. You can go on the link on my bio. This is where you can find my resume guide. So I do have a resume guide. I also have a free training. So I'm doing workshops, depending on when folks are listening to this. I may have a free workshop coming up, or you can watch a replay. So you can go to thefirstgencoach.com/free training, and you will learn how to get job offers faster.
I am going on there like
Yes.
right now.
Yay! Perfect. Yeah. And honestly, anyone who's listening, please just let me know. Like, it's always so helpful to know that people are listening and that this is actually things that they need to know. So just let
Oh,
me know. I'm also on LinkedIn. Like, if you find me on LinkedIn, Carla Santamaria, just make sure that you send me a personalized message, because I get a lot of weirdos trying to add me on there. So yeah, my podcast and Instagram.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming and agreeing to interview on our podcast. And we look forward to hearing from you again sometime soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much
yeah.
for having me. This was so much fun.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone, for listening. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.